guys, thanks for joining me today. My name is Sam Garner, and I'm going to be walking you through a piece I composed titled Ironwind. Throughout the course, I'm going to be introducing a lot of concepts and showing you a lot of tips and tricks I've learned. I hope that whatever I show you can be of use to you in your future MIDI orchestrations. If you like what you watch, please subscribe to my channel. Now, there's a lot going on in this composition, and it's a very large session, so I can't cover every aspect, but I'm going to move fast and try to get in as much information as I can to help you out. I am a Logic Pro user, but the concepts I'm going to teach you apply to every DAW, not just this one. Now, this is an intermediate course. It is assumed that you have some basic MIDI experience and are comfortable working in a DAW. I will skip over many things that I feel you should already know, and if you don't, please feel free to leave a comment below and let me know. This is my very first tutorial video, so if you hate it, please tell me. This is a very broad overview of the composition mixed in with some nitty-gritty detailed stuff. So if you wanted me to further explore something and I don't, I apologize. Like I said, please leave a comment below and just let me know. For this composition, I used a lot of Hollywood Strings Gold, the East-West Quantum Leap Symphonic Orchestra, some instruments from the Native Instruments Complete Bundle, and Cinesamples Brass. These concepts that I'm going to teach with these sample libraries are also universal to most sample libraries, so you can apply this lesson to what you own. Alright, so as you can tell, there is a lot going on, so let's just go ahead and jump on in. I'm going to go to bar 6. I'm going to drop down this global track menu for you. You can see it is composed in 7/8. 7/8 is one of my favorite time signatures, but it is a very, very common time signature, especially in this action kind of music. And this song is also composed in C minor. So we're going to start with the string section, and first I'm going to play it for you, and then we're going to kind of break it down piece by piece and show you how I approached it compositionally. So here we go. All right, so let's go down to the cellos. The cellos have the main part of this ostinato rhythm. The cellos are a very full-bodied and dominant instrument, so I gave it to the cellos. So let's take a listen to them by themselves. All right, so it's not too clean. Right now, we're just going to be talking compositionally. We are going to come back later and do some MIDI fixing to make that sound a little bit cleaner. So right now, just bear with me on the MIDI part. We're just speaking compositionally. So we're going to go up to the viola. All I did for the viola was take the cello and just copy and paste it to the viola part. So if we listen to that. So this is in a very low part of the playing range for the viola, so the viola is not able to hit this low B flat. But I like the way the viola sounds this low. It's got a very unique kind of shrill, dirty sound, so I just went ahead and put it in. It's also kind of a little dirty, so we're gonna go back and fix that later along with the cello. So now we're going to go up to the second violin. Instead of copying and pasting the ostinato part to the violin, I decided to give it kind of a pulsing tonal center pattern. And if hopefully you know enough about MIDI velocity, but your strong values are right here on 1, 3, and 5. And then your weaker values are on 2, 4, 6, and 7. So if you take a listen to that. Yeah, so I mean, this is really just serving as a weight. It's kind of accenting the highlights of that cello and viola ostinato. So when you listen to that all together. And really, the second violin's kind of highlighting how the 7/8 is broken up. So this is very commonly referred to 2 plus 2 plus 3, 7/8. So you have. Let's go back to the beginning. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. That's a very common way to break up 7/8. So that's really just highlighting that. So now if we go up to the first violin, I basically just copied the second violin part and added it to the staccato patch in the first violin. But I also added in this collegno patch. So let me play just the first violin for you. So I love doing this. The collegno, by itself, if you listen to it, it's kind of obnoxious. But when you add it all together, it kind of adds a slappy punch to the sound. It's kind of adds a percussive nature. It's really serving more of a percussion role than a tonal role. So when we play the whole string section together. So yeah, you can hear that collegno just kind of out, in the back of the mix, just kind of adding a little bit of pulse. And when you add in everything and the whole piece is playing, it might not even be as audible as it is now, but it does add just a little bit different of an element to the song to make it stand out. So now we're going to go back down to the cello and kind of get into the nitty-gritty stuff. First off, I'm going to talk about this very important concept that a MIDI orchestrator can use, and it's called layering. Don't confuse layering with doubling. Doubling is more of an orchestration concept where you take a line and have another instrument play the same line, maybe up an octave, down an octave, in unison. But a good example is, the second violin patch. I've doubled that with the first violin patch. They're two different instrument sections playing the same thing. The viola is doubling this cello part because they're playing the same thing. Layering is more of a MIDI orchestration concept. So if you noticed earlier, I have this staccato patch, but I also have a staccissimo patch. So I'll play what they both sound like by themselves. I don't know why I did that. All right, so it is kind of dirty. We're going to fix that in just a second. Let me play the staccissimo patch for you. much more aggressive. So if you look at what is the difference between staccato and staccissimo, staccato's kind of more rounded. It's a little bit of a longer short note. It doesn't have a very as aggressive of a front attack as staccissimo does. So I really blended, and this is what layering is all about. You're blending, two different sounds to create one sound. So if you listen to that together. Now I'm going to isolate them for you and then add them together. Now together. So you can tell it's a different sound. It has the front aggressive attack of the staccissimo, but it has the rounded release tail that the regular staccato patch has. So now let's fix this staccato patch because it's not as clean as I would like it. So I'm going to open up the piano roll. We're going to get in here. So let's listen to it. So if you can tell, they're all connected, and they're a little too long. And I think that the computer is getting hung up trying to play these because they're just so close together, so it's not very clean. So I'm going to highlight all of them, and then in Logic, if you hold down the Control key, you're going to snap off the grid, and you can make very small changes. So I'm going to do that. I'm sorry, it's the Option key. No, I was kidding. Okay, you have to click and then click the Control key. That's the thing with Macs. If you hit the Control key before you click, it's a right click. But if you click first and then hold Control, it's going to allow you to make small, minute changes. So I'm going to drag them. Let's see how that sounds. That's a lot better, a lot better. So let's hear what that sounds like with the staccissimo. That is so much cleaner. Sounds so much better. So I'm going to open up the piano roll and show you one last thing. This roll is showing you the staccissimo and the staccato patch. So I'm going to zoom in, and if you can tell, there are different notes. You can kind of tell one is one instrument, the other is the other. And I'll drag it down so you can see it. So I just kind of want you to pay attention to this. How they're kind of starting at different times. And we're going to touch upon that now, but I want you to see this in the context of the cello. They're not starting at the same time. And this is another very useful MIDI orchestration technique that we're going to touch up on later. So let's go up to this viola patch. This is also not as clean as I would like it to be. So it's a little dirty. So I think all it needs is kind of the same thing we did with the cello. So let's highlight all of them, click, hold Control, bring them back a little bit. And right here, this is not quite what I want it to be, so let's shorten it up. Let me play that for you so you know what I'm talking about. Kind of here, it's kind of scooting to the next note. So I'm gonna do this. Also here, I don't like this. Yeah, so that'll work. And with Logic, I've set up a loop region, so anything I change over here is going to apply throughout the rest of the piece. Now, let's go back to that concept I was talking about earlier. I'm going to bring up the cello and the viola together. And as you can tell, they're not all starting at the same time. The viola in some places is starting at different times than the cello. And this is actually not as diverse as I want it to be. It's a little bit too similar, um, but it's close enough since the viola is playing a very subtle role in this line. It'll do. All right, so that's enough with the strings. Let's move on to the low brass. The low brass in this section is really just doing the same thing that the violin 1 and violin 2 were doing, which is just highlighting the downbeats and accents of the ostinato rhythm. So let me zoom in for you. So if you take a look at the instrumentation, we've got trombone 1 right here, trombone 2, which doesn't come on until a little bit later, then a cimbasso plus bass trombone patch, a trombone muted patch, and a monster articulation patch. I'll explain what all those are in just a second. So let's go up to trombone 1. I'll play this for you real quick. So that's all it is. It's just a G. The chord, essentially the chord on this section is C minor. So I've got the top voice of the low brass playing a G, but everything else is playing a C. So trombone 2 doesn't come until later, so we'll skip that for now. If we go down to the cimbasso and bass trombone patch, this is a patch that comes with Cinesamples brass. I use it a lot when I kind of want to get a punchy end from the bottom of the brass, so it's obviously perfect for this style of piece. So if you take a listen, you'll hear what I'm talking about. So very aggressive, very punchy, just very shrill almost. It really punches through the mix. Now, if you see here, I have a trombone muted patch loaded up. This is a trombone cup mute patch. I like to add in muted patches a lot with these kind of punchy, aggressive, staccato rhythms. It just kind of adds a different sound, a little bit of grit. So I will play the cimbasso and bass trombone patch and then add in the muted patch for you. So you might not even hear anything. It's very, very subtle, and depending on what kind of listening environment you're in, you might not hear anything at all. And in just a couple minutes, I'm going to touch on something else that's going to even help this even further punch out. So then we're going to go down to this monster articulation patch. This is another library that comes specifically with Cinesamples. It's a very, very full and aggressive all-in-one brass sound. It's basically a lot of brass players playing at the same time. So you'll hear what I'm talking about. So it's obviously just loud, bombastic, very, very full. So, I mean, that's really all that's going on in the low brass. It's very simple, just highlighting that ostinato rhythm. But what's really important about the low brass is that it's very full. It's a solid foundation for everything going on above it. And one of the most important things you can do is to not hard quantize your parts. All right, so I'm going to show you what hard quantizing looks like. If you remember from earlier, I was talking about the strings, like the staccato and the stacchismo patch of the cellos, how they weren't playing at the same time. So let me show you what it looks like when they are playing at the same time. I'm going to bring up this piano roll, and this is the cimbasso, bass trombone, and trombone muted patch. This is what's called hard quantize. If you look right here, they're playing at the exact same time. Right here, they're playing at the exact same time. So let me solo those for you and play them. So that doesn't sound too bad. It sounds good, really. And I'll show you how a player or a composer can get to this point. Let's say you just recorded this in, and let's put these MIDI notes right here. Let's say that's That's how they get entered in. That's, you played this one patch a little early, you played this one a little late. It's like, oh, I want it to sound perfect. So you're going to highlight them all, hit Q, quantize them to the grid, and then you think it's all perfect. So when you play them back, like, oh man, that sounds good. So you don't ever think to change it. But this is not really realistic. If you think about a trombone section in an actual real orchestra, they don't play perfectly in time. The first trombone player might play squarely on the grid. He might be perfect and hit the downbeat, but the second trombone player might be a couple milliseconds late. The third trombone player might be a couple milliseconds early. The fourth trombone player might be a little out of tune. All these subtle imperfections create a very full sound. It's the same concept that applies to like an 18 violin section. 18 violins don't sound big because they're all perfectly playing in tune, playing at the same time. They sound big because each one of them is slightly out of tune with the person sitting next to them, and that creates a very rich harmonic sound that's very, very big and full-bodied. So what I want to show you is this feature in Logic called Humanize. I know Cubase has something called Iterative Quantize, and I'm not sure what all the other DAWs have, but the same concept applies, and each one of them can do something like this. So you'll just need to do the proper research, whatever software you're using. So I'm going to hit Command 4, and that's going to bring up this little MIDI window. Sometimes when you bring it up, it doesn't go to Humanize immediately. So if you see something different, just hit this drop-down menu and come down to Humanize. So I'm going to select all these notes, and I'm going to kind of show you what all these parameters do. Position is going to change how far off the grid you're going to move. So 10 is the default. You can kind of move it around. 20's getting a little high, but it wouldn't be too bad. 0 is obviously nothing. So I want to move it up to 15 to see what that's going to look like. Velocity. You have to be careful when you're changing velocity because certain sample libraries change sounds or different patches when you cross a certain threshold of your velocity. So I know with Cinesamples, if I cross a certain velocity threshold, it's going to change the length of the staccato. So I don't want to change it too much because I don't want to get these random, new patches when I humanize this. Length, not too important, but it's the same concept as position. You can just kind of drag this and move it. With staccato patches, it's not as important, but just know that it's there. So with this feature, you can either select all and hit operate, or you can not have them selected and then click select and operate. But if you look, you can see that when I hit this, things are kind of moving off the grid. So now when we listen to that, do it some more. Maybe let's try moving the grid up a little bit more, maybe 18. So you can kind of tell that that's a little bit fuller. Now you don't have to hit the operate button 20 times. You maybe just need to hit it once. I like to play around with it a little bit, maybe hit it 3 or 4 times. It's really up to you. Just do it until you kind of get the sound that you want, but you can tell that this really is a little bit fuller than when everything was quantized. It's subtle, but it is a very, very, very important thing. So when you play the brass section now, so you can tell, if you really listen, you can kind of hear instruments kind of starting out of sync with each other. And that might sound wrong, but when you put everything in, it really creates this very, very full sound. And if you're still uncomfortable with this concept, we're going to keep talking about this throughout this course because it's an extremely important tool to grasp and to get a hold of, because if you can master it, it's going to give you an edge over other people's mock-ups. All right, so before we move on to the rest of the brass and percussion, I want to touch upon a very important thing to watch out for when you're kind of building a composition from the ground up like this, and that's something called headroom. I had the hardest time really getting used to this, and what would happen is by the time I got to the end of my song, my music would be so loud and distorting that I'd have to go back and turn everything down, and then you have all these automation parameters written in, and it's just a big mess. So it's better to start from the beginning, keeping in mind how much headroom you're leaving yourself, so when you get further on in the piece, it's not a hassle to undo. So I'm just going to play everything we've worked on so far, and I'm going to have you pay attention to this output meter right here. So as you can tell, it's not that loud. I mean, you can turn your playback system up and it's going to be very loud, but as far as this meter is concerned, it's not that loud. And what that's going to do is when you start adding in, the French horn melody, the big drum hits and the timpani and the gongs and the voices and all these earthquake ensembles and Godzilla hits, you're going to give yourself a little bit of room to add that stuff in. And then if you have enough headroom at the end, you can go and add a little compression, limiter, whatever you can do to make it louder. But you don't want to make a piece as loud as possible at the very beginning. You always want to be thinking about what you're going to be adding in down the road.